still got to get music for you too. Got to figure out some music.
Need to find a musician. I know musicians. It's like I need to bribe, beg, or blackmail one of them into doing a little starter for me.
All right, here we go.
Maybe we can all just sit here and go.
30 seconds. 30 seconds. Here we go.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. And no music, so we're on. Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia on the radio. I'm here, joined once again by my co-host Brian McKinley and our sidekick, my fiancée Amisha Campbell. Tonight we've got one of my favorite guests on, author Patrick Thomas. I could certainly introduce you very easily, my friend, but Patrick, why don't you introduce yourself? Patrick?
There he is. Hold on.
Hold on.
Which includes...
Hold on. We had a bit of a glitch.
Okay.
Go ahead.
How's that?
We didn't hear any of it, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. No worries. No, I was hearing myself echo, so I figured maybe there was some sort of weird feedback loop. So, I'm the author of the Murphy's Law Universe series of books. The main set of books is set in Bullfinch's pub in Manhattan and a bar that's owned by a leprechaun. He bought the place with his pot of gold, so rainbows lead people in trouble to the bar. Hercules is the bouncer. Dionysus, god of wine, women in song, is one of the bartenders, and various people of myth, legend, folklore, and everyday New Yorkers come in, and stuff happens. 8 books summarized really quickly. They go out into space in about 30 years in the future, not in starships, but barships in the Startenders series. And there's been a few spin-offs, which include Terabelle, who's half ogre, half pixie in all attitude. There's Negro, who is a forgotten Sumerian god who's chief of police in hell. There is Vince Argus, who's the hitman who sold a soul to the devil. A few others. I also write the Dear Cthulhu advice columns and advice books, and I write the Mystic Investigator series. And I have my first book was a science fiction space opera, which is actually going to be coming back in a 20th anniversary edition. And As the Gears Turn is a steampunk book I did.
Very nice.
So I've done a little bit of everything.
Very, very extensive.
And I forgot a mystery. I co-wrote with John French, Assassin's Ball, which is a traditional mystery. I have a few paranormal mysteries as well.
And for our listeners, John French is our guest next week, in fact.
Excellent.
Yeah, it just occurred to me. It's like you guys have worked together so much. One of these times, I'm going to definitely have to have the two of you on together.
Oh, that'd be great. That'd be great. No, we've written, well, we've had 4 books together published. We are finishing up the sequel to Assassin's Ball, which at the moment we're debating between the titles The Smuggler's Shuffle and The Magician's Two-Step. I prefer one, John prefers the other. We'll see which one ends up, but probably be the publisher breaking the tie. But it's a sequel to the first one with Jack and Annie Gardner, and we have 5 books in the series plotted out. It's just a matter of writing it out, of course.
Yeah, the Assassin's Ball is one of the ones I haven't gotten to yet. And yet is definitely the key phrase here.
Very, very busy
Well, thank
guy.
Yeah.
Well, it's a fun premise. A husband and wife PI team go undercover at a convention to solve a murder, but it's a convention for assassins and hitmen, so everybody's a suspect.
So I have to ask the obvious question then, will Argus be making an appearance at some point?
No, different universe. So this is more of a traditional human mystery, no magic, no paranormal, no sci-fi. So no, not unless maybe there was a short film made, and maybe if it gets big enough, maybe they'll go see it in another book. Who knows?
It seems like an interesting
That'd be the only crossover.
one shot, what if of the two, he shows up at the ball type of thing.
It could be fun. Actually, I do have, and I haven't done any stories with it, another set of stories that would allow me to cross over characters from my different universes who don't coexist. It's just a matter of figuring out the plot lines. But I have the mechanism that could make it work.
Nice.
So it's just a matter of making the story work. As a writer, sometimes you have a really good concept, but if you don't have the plot to go with it, you got to wait until that comes along too.
Yes.
Yeah, you and Brian would know more about that than I do. I'm afraid I'm still struggling. I've got so many things going on at the moment. It's hard to settle down long enough to write something.
Well, I can attest that everything Patrick says is true.
So I gotta wonder, when you come up with one of these ideas, do you get the concept first? You scene playing out in your head? And what usually comes first in your mind?
A lot of times it's the concept, and then I go back and figure it out. With Murphy's Lore, since it alternates between short story collections that tie together and novels, with several of the stories, especially in the first two collections, I had two concepts which didn't work right by themselves, and then I'm like, well, if I put them together, that would work. And sometimes, that way you take two ideas that wouldn't necessarily work by themselves, put them together, you get your own internal mashup. And occasionally I did one story where I have a Knight of the Round Table, Sir Dagonet, who's alive in the modern day, actually saving a dragon instead of slaying a dragon.
Oh, yes.
And at the end of it, I wrote the story, and then I realized I missed a really obvious pun because I had a character who is a camel, but he spent time in fairy, and in fairy animals gain intelligence and can speak if they want to. Not all of them want to speak human languages anyway. And I realized I had a story with a camel and a knight, and I missed a really obvious pun. Most people think I wrote the story just to get the pun, but Murphy makes a joke that the camel's name is Damien. If he brings some of his friends and hangs out in the parking lot, that maybe Sir Dagonet and some of the other knights of the Round Table would visit more often. And Patty, the owner, asks, "What do you mean?" And Dagonet says, "Let me get this one, Murphy, because you'd have your own Camelot." So, yes, Murphy does like very bad puns. The people around him, not so much. But it was such an obvious pun, I kicked myself because I didn't realize it at first. So, would have hated myself had I missed it and figured it out later.
Dagonet is definitely one of my favorite characters of yours.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I was going to say he actually, notwithstanding Murphy and Terabell, he's one of mine, and I am trying to finish up his first collection, which will take him from Camelot all the way to the modern day with a few stops in between. There's one story that's set in the Old West that I have the ending done. I just haven't got the beginning to flow right, because it actually takes Dagonet a little bit out of character, and shows, he may be a jester, because Dagonet in traditional myths was the jester, and in many of them he was knighted, so he could defend himself against the knight, because a common person could not fight a knight. And with that, he's played a lot he's very serious, but, he's a jester, so he's going to lighten things up. In this one, he's anything but, and he's avenging people who were slaughtered, and it's not his typical story, so the ending is very powerful. I just have to make the beginning worthy of that ending.
Wow.
So without giving too much away.
Just the thought of Dagonet losing it like that.
And the other thing is he has a magical sword, because knights should have magical swords.
Naturally.
His is a little bit different in that it's called Hayden, and it is invisible, and it telescopes. It elongates. So he could be standing here and stab somebody 20 feet away from him. He also can use it as a skilled gymnast with 1,000 years experience, can use it to make himself, seemingly jump up into the air or go forward fast. So he uses it as more than just a weapon. But in this story, it is used most definitely as a most deadly weapon, because it is a sword that can elongate. Just because he chooses not to kill all the time, he's still a knight, and there are times when he would use it for that. So it does take his losing it is quite justified. That's why I have to make the beginning work with the end. So, but the other stories are good. They've been done. There's 3 set in Camelot. There is one set in 1200s. There's one set in 1600s where he meets Blackbeard, called The Pirate Jester. And then we go to the Old West, and then we go to the modern day. And they're actually, John French and I are editing an anthology called Camelot 13, which should be out in May of 2018. And I am currently working on polishing up a Dagonet story for that, which will not be in his collection, but will actually be dealing with something more powerful than Excalibur, the sheath that Excalibur was kept in.
Worth 10 that the sword. I remember
Well,
the
the
Arthurian legend.
Well, the sheath was actually much more powerful because as long as Arthur wore it, he could not be killed. And then it was stolen by a knight, and then Camelot later fell, and he was killed. But had that knight not gotten away with it, Camelot would not have ended. And, you know, and in my stories, Merlin did some of the bad things he did because he had two visions of what would happen. One, what did happen, and the other one, Camelot lasting 1,000 years with Arthur being, you know, king for 1,000 years and bringing a utopia to part of Earth. And unfortunately for all of us, that didn't work out.
It's such a shame. I have to say, one of the reasons, I mean, I love trickster characters, which Dagonet certainly qualifies as, but I think one of the reasons I most like him, and it's one of the things that really caught me with your stories, is when I first read about Dagonet, it's like, wait, Jester, who was the Knight of the Round Table, that can't be right. And I looked it up and I went, oh, wow.
Well, I haven't worked into a story yet. Dagonet often will gripe internally because he is not a well-known knight, as you just proved.
This is true.
You know, he does not think highly of Lancelot. Lancelot's dead, but he, you know, blames Lancelot as much as he blames Mordred for what happened.
Which I agree wholeheartedly.
Well, Lancelot has some problems.
Well, anybody who actually knows the Arthurian legend and actually goes, wait a minute, and will actually say, no, Lancelot was a jackass.
He was, and actually he was also a cross-dresser, which is covered in some of the lessons, because he was raised by one of the ladies of the lake. There are several. And there was a prophecy that said that in his childhood that he would be killed, and so she dressed him as a woman until he was 18. In one of the legends. So I'm going with that one. And actually, I have established in mind that Hercules was Sir Bors, and Sir Bors helped raise Lancelot. And so that's going to be... that's been alluded to in some of the stories, but that'll be touched on a little bit more as time goes on. But it's just a lot of fun with that. But he's going to be having a discussion with the sheriff from By the Horn in an upcoming story, and I just haven't worked out. They're going to ask him what his favorite Arthurian movie is, and and I'm blanking on the name of the movie now. It was not a good movie. It was
King Arthur.
Like there were 12 knights. It might have been just plain King Arthur. There were 12 knights. Lancelot and his son were the same age. It was just really bad. But he's going to say it's his favorite because in it he's 6'4". Dagonet is in it, but he's 6'4". He's solid muscle, and he smashes a lake with a hammer.
Yeah, that's King Arthur.
Going to be his favorite one.
King Arthur movie.
It's a terrible movie, but Dagonet's actually in it, and yeah, he's actually pretty bad at it.
So
for that one, that's going to be his favorite movie, possibly followed by Monty Python and Holy Grail.
Oh, well, naturally.
That's a given.
That's a given.
I have a question as a fellow writer. How do you tend to plot out like your books or stories beforehand and then follow that, or do you tend to kind of make it up piecemeal and like what's your technique in general?
I have done both. I typically plot it out, but I will say, in all honesty, many times things change as I'm writing it. And I'm like, oh wait, no, this would work better. Oh no, that you get to one part and you're like, oh, that won't work now because of this. So I have a plot 80% of the time. I know how I want the book to end. I know the beginning, and a lot of times I have parts of the middle. But sometimes when you're going through the process, which I'm sure, Brian, it's happened to you, the characters sometimes take over, or you see a hole in your plot line, or you see a way you could do something better, and it changes the whole storyline. So it's kind of like no battle plan survives contact with the enemy.
Sounds like how I feel whenever I'm running a role-playing game. It's like, don't plot it out much because it's not going to last 5 minutes.
Pretty true.
But way of contrast with the Murphy's Law universe in particular, Because I think, not counting the 3 limited editions, I think we're up to 17 or 18 published books in the universe, and then there were also 3 limited editions, but 2 of them have been in 2 of the other books, and one will be out in another collection in the next year or 2. I have easily another 25 books in the universe in notebooks with the basics plotted out, some of them with more than the basics. So the novels sometimes may change, but I have stuff so I can drop and foreshadow.
Sure.
And I have actually a few fans who are a little annoyed at me because I dropped some foreshadowing in book 1, which I planned to actually deal with in book 4. And then I realized what would happen there, which for a future novel I'd planned, and book 4 became Shadow of the Wolf, that one of my characters, Lucas Wilson, who is a vampire, would not be able to participate in the same way in Shadow of the Wolf if I did that novel first. And so I put it off, and because of that, it's been almost 20 years since I foreshadowed, and I have done other stories which lead up to the storyline, so it's not as if it's been a drop plot line. But I have started the culmination of that, but I do have people who will bug me as to when that is coming.
As someone
for a while.
who knows which plotline you're referring to, I can't wait to see it.
Yeah.
I'm glad I didn't pick this up 20 years ago because I'd probably be going nuts. It's like,
I will say this much. Like I said, I've done the first 2 chapters, and I have an idea where it's going. Patty loses Murphy in a bet for a couple weeks. He bets Layla, who owns Plasma, which is a club for vampires. And she bets her bouncer, who we find out used to work for Patty in the Prohibition times, Barber, versus Murphy. Patty actually loses the bet, so Murphy has to go work in this vampire bar. And it's a bit different working environment than he's used to, and that's where we kick off everything. But I've also been working on a novel called Before Twilight, which is a follow-up to Redemption Road, where Loki is one of my recurring characters. And this, without giving away too much, this book will determine about whether or not Murphy can get, or Loki can get himself out of his eternal punishment. So, and I'm well into 60,000 words, probably closing on 70, and it'll probably be about 90 when it's done. But it's that'll be out a little bit before the other one, which my working title is Blood and Thunder, but I think that will change before it comes out. And the other one is Before Twilight, because the quote from Loki will be, because in the novels there's a quote at the beginning of each chapter from one of the characters. It'll be, "Before the twilight of the gods, there will be a brief intermission." So, and that will take this, and then that will actually lead us into Fool's Night, which will be both a sequel to that book and to Fool's Day, which was one of the other books. So it should be a lot of fun when that happens. And then Loki will be done in the modern day for a little bit, because then the next major thing will be Ragnarok, and I don't want that to happen just yet. Although Patty in the bar has a contract, an agreement with Odin to cater Ragnarok. So
that's another one of those bits
that'll
that
be
you
fun.
dropped that I've been looking. It's like, that sounds like it's going to pay off in an interesting way.
Well, that's one of the scenes, like the very end of Ragnarok. Mm-hmm. My version, I have the last scene. Well, not the last scene of the battle written, and it's a lot of fun. But I don't have the rest of the. Sometimes a scene just comes to your head, and you know you're not going to write the book for a few years, but you have to do the scene. I recently did that for a lot of people. Are fans of Terabelle. At one point, her first book, Fairy with a Gun, had been optioned by Lawrence Fishburne's production company, Cinema Gypsy Productions. They'd wanted to make a TV show out of it. It didn't happen, but I can say that Morpheus liked my book, and that's pretty cool.
Yes, it is.
And in the second book, I hadn't decided up until Fairy Rides the Lightning whether or not Murphy and Terabelle were going to end up together. And then by the time Star Tenders came around, I kind of had to know. And after having finished Fairy Rides the Lightning, I decided that they would. And it won't necessarily happen right away, but I have written 12,000 words of when they actually get together,
Oh boy.
which is a good portion of what the book is going to be. And it's really good. But the problem is there are other things that have to come out before that happens. But it's from my point of view, at least I know what happens.
You sound like you have similar problems to me as far as plotting out like these long involved series and whatnot, because I have that too. I'm not nearly as far along as you are, but I have the same kind of long term plans.
Well, it's fun to do that, and it's fun when you're going to do that because you can drop hints or foreshadow, or you can put something in that you can use later. But in the first Murphy's Law book, Tales from Bullfinch's Pub, I guess at that time I was just seeing Zeus here and Zeus there, and you see, I'd rather write about Dagonet than Lancelot, because everyone's done Lancelot, no one's done Dagonet. And with the Olympian gods, I'm like, I don't want to do Zeus. He's born. So I put in this throwaway line that Zeus is missing from the mortal and Olympian planes, and nobody knows where he went. And at the time, I didn't know either. But by the time book 3 rolled around, I figured out where he was. I got a really cool storyline. And then in book 5, I managed to work it into the plot line. So, and then in From the Shadows, which takes place in the 30s, although actually 30s and 40s, because the story takes place, just by necessity, has to take place after Casablanca comes out, because it indirectly ties peripherally, doesn't appear in the book, but to something with Hell's Detective, and Hell's Detective is doesn't go to hell to after Casablanca comes out. It just he's obsessed with Humphrey Bogart, and the movie has to come out before he goes down. And he's gone in that story. But anyway, she has to face off. Nemesis, the Pink Reaper, and John French's Nightmare have to face off against Zeus in the 1930s. And he's a little different than he is in the current day, or traditionally on Olympus.
I'm sorry, go ahead, honey.
Yeah, I have a question, and I'm feeling I know the answer. After Dagonet...
False. None of the above.
Blue.
Purple.
After Dagonet, who of the established, not-original Bayou characters is your favorite to write for?
So not Murphy?
So not Murphy. Like somebody who was pre-existing.
Carabelle followed by Hell's Detective. They've both been a lot of fun. Hell's
Nurgle
Detective
is actually
I do a lot of short stories. He almost demands novellas. I don't know. He is, picky about that. And by way of contrast, Argus most of Argus's stories run 3,000 words, which, is just interesting. But I also, Graveyard Angel Moni, I've done quite a few with her, and I enjoy her. I think I go in spurts depending on what I'm working on at the time, but House Detective and Terrible probably the two tops, followed with Dagonet, although Dagonet just hasn't had as much word count done with him, although he and House Detective have a very interesting relationship. Negro is forgotten Sumerian god of fire, plague, and war, who works in hell because he used up all his mana, which is something gods need to survive. And for some reason, I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to have these two together? He's very dour and serious, and he's a bad guy, but he has a sense of honor, which in hell makes him the good guy. But he's not a pushover, so he can go toe-to-toe with demons and, kick their butts, and, no problem there. So he's not a nice guy, but he's got his sense of honor. What would happen if he and Dagonet were friends? Because Dagonet is the exact opposite. And although I haven't written the stories, I have a whole series, and I blame John French for this, because originally my Pink Reaper character was not going to be in the Murphy's Law universe. But he wanted to write a story crossing over his Nightmare with Pink Reaper and Nemesis, who's Carabelle's boss. And because of that, she's in the universe, and I have all of these. Murphy's Noir is a subcategory set in the 30s with all these characters. And I've established that at some point, Dagonet and Negro were in vaudeville together, and Negro was the straight man. And I have to get to writing, and I have the ideas of why this happened, and it ties into stuff that's already been established. But just the idea of this dour, tough guy, just being in vaudeville, being part of a comedy act. Just
It seems like somebody lost a bet there.
yeah. So
or had to
well,
really do something that, like that time Batman had to sing it in front of a crowd.
there you go. It won't be quite that, but it's going to tie in that I established that he had to leave his afterlife. I don't want to give away plot points from the book, but he used to be the ruler of a Sumerian afterlife, and he's not anymore. And when he left, he came onto Earth. I haven't quite established the date, but late 20s, early 30s, 1930s. And when he arrives, the first nice person he meets is going to be Dagonet, and it's going to kind of be a Hope and Crosby kind of thing with the road movies. So, but with more magic and a little bit more deadly than Bing or Bob.
So Laurel and Hardy.
Actually, I have established in one of the stories that Dagonet and Negril were in a Laurel and Hardy movie.
Oh, nice.
And I'm blanking on the movie. I have it written down. I was watching a Laurel and Hardy movie, and they're in prison. And at one point, there's like a small little riot, and across the screen, and Dagonet is established to be 4'10", so he's short. So across the screen, in a prison outfit, walks a guy who's like 4'10" with a beard, which Dagonet has. And I'm like, Dagonet was in this movie, okay.
Nice.
And I actually have the time in the movie, and I'm blanking on the name. It's one where they end up in prison. I have it written down. My dad was a huge Laurel and Hardy fan, so I've seen a lot of the movies. My son is 11, and oddly enough, loves Laurel and Hardy. But like I said, just watching this, because everybody else in this riot is average to tall height. And then this one guy just comes across in the riot. I'm like, okay. So Dagonet is in this movie for some reason. I got to work out the details. And Negro was there, but Negro could be any of the other people in the movie. So.
But hey, you're around for over 1,000 years. You might show up in a movie or two.
Well,
Well,
there was a cattle call.
Go ahead. Well, I have that he was big in vaudeville, and at one point he's talking to a sheriff in Texas, and because they're trying to figure out what's going on, and there were pictures of him in vaudeville.
Mm-hmm.
But he was very careful to not take any starring roles in any movies because he was smart enough to realize if he did that, people would notice him. 50 years later, and the sheriff's like, so you're not going to try and tell me that this is your grandfather? He's like, no, that was me. And what I've established is he does throughout history, he just changes his last name to a color. So at the time in vaudeville, he was Dagonet Black. So, but he's at various points. He's been in prison a lot because several of the stories start or end with, or in the middle with him in prison. So he's done that a lot, and at some point he mentions that he has been both a circus and a rodeo clown for at least a brief period, because he was talking with one of my other characters who is a clown. So that he's done both. I'm not thinking he spent 20 years doing either of those, but he has that experience, and he's also starting in the noir era. He was a special consultant agent for the Department of Mystic Affairs, which I have the League of Shadows, which originally I wanted to be 13, but when I broke it down, there are 14 members of the League of Shadows, which get alluded to in different books, and actually some of them make cameos in Law and Disorder. So I actually have had one of the characters is called the Ghast. His origin story was in Lucky 13. I've written one for a character called the Dead Lady, who, when Nemesis was kind of out of sorts, takes up her job as an enforcer for the Council of Thrones. And I have her origin story done. I haven't placed it anywhere yet. And I started one for a character called the Terror Crow. So, and the Pink Reapers had a number of stories published, so she's one of the ones from that era. So, and again, I blame John French.
It's all its fault.
I plan to do origin stories for a bunch of these, and then the book will be called Born from Shadows. And probably figure 3-4 years the way I work, it would probably be ready to come out. And then I have, they're all going to kind of join together, kind of, if you would, for comic books, the origin story of the group. So since they're called the League of Shadows, it'll be Shadows in Innsmouth, as opposed to over. They didn't just send a submarine when it happened.
Yeah, of course not.
So the two of the characters are DMA agents who have been appeared in other books, and they're basically going to gather these guys for a full assault on the Deep Ones, which can actually tie into one of Dagonet's published stories from Camelot, because it was for a anthology called Cthulhu Unbound Volume 2, where we had to somehow in history and working Cthulhu mythos. So I have Dagonet. There's a legend in some of the mythologies where there's a kingdom, an island kingdom called Lyonnaise, and I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, which Sir Tristan is from, and Sir Tristan in the books is actually quite friendly with Sir Dagonet in some of the legends. And the whole story ties into basically the Deep Ones have taken over this island, and Lord Dagon gets summoned, and Merlin, basically, he ends up with a Bacchae, so kind of a flying bat that's intelligent that he helps, and they save a bunch of people, and they get away, and then basically Merlin goes back, and in the legends, Merlin sinks his island. And so basically it happens off camera, but Merlin goes after Dagonet gets everyone out, and he's with Merlin's sister, Ganita, and it ends with basically Merlin sinking the island with the Deep Ones. So I already have the basis for a tie-in with Dagonet with the mythos, so that should be a lot of fun.
See, one of my favorite things that you do, and our mutual friend, the late C.J. Henderson, did at least once or twice, that I really like, is this whole idea of there is no masquerade. You know, DMA tells everybody exactly what they do.
And it's really kind of refreshing in a way. And like I was about ready to comment on that. They're very open about what they are, and just the kind of bafflement people have that they're not even attempting any cute little thing or something.
Well, it's been done so many times, and it's been done well. X-Files, Hellboy in the Bureau of Paranormal Research and Development, they all, and tons of other places, they cover it up. And to me, that just seems boring, and I didn't want to do something that, has been done to death.
It's boring, but there's kind of an upper limit to how much you can buy that, like Transformers movies. Okay, you're telling me that they got all the videotapes, all the cameras, and all the phones of everybody who was in that city. Yeah, sure.
100-foot robots battled and nobody knew about it.
And nobody talked about it.
Yeah.
The great example I always think of is the one C.J. Henderson novel. I forget which one, but it's one of his Piers Knight books, where literal dragons show up and fly all over the world, and they actually have the conversation where the government wants to shut it up, and Piers's sidekick's like, you can't shut this up in the internet age. How the heck are you gonna hide dragons seen by millions of people? And I agree. I mean, some people have done the cover-up thing very well, but it's been done so many times. It's just, one, it's nice to see just, nope, we're going to tell everybody exactly what's going on. And two, logistically speaking, kind of telling everybody the exact truth is sometimes the easiest way to cover it up.
Well, because in the modern age, you can say, no, this is totally what happened, and half the people out there won't believe you. They'll be like, no, it wasn't dragons. It was climate change. Or something. Like they'll come up with their own conspiracy theories.
It was lizard men that involved.
Yeah. It's
not
ridiculous.
sure if you're aware of this, Patrick, though if you're not, feel free to use the idea. It occurs to me, back during the Cold War era, all the hype that came up about UFOs, we now know from declassified CIA documents that the U.S. government, while it didn't invent the UFO craze, it did hype it up to help cover the things they were actually doing. It occurs to me that could sort of work both ways.
This is true. I was always fascinated with the story of the Foo Fighters.
Oh yes.
To me, that always was interesting. But yeah, no, that would work. But with the DMA, what I just am amused by is they're known as an agency, but like other cops treat them as if they're like, crossing guards. Yeah, you fight the vampires and that because they don't exist, so you're kind of worthless until, the mystic poop hits the fan, in which case they're like, this is real. And they're like, yeah, we told you. You didn't believe us. And
we told you exactly
like you said,
what was
the people,
going on.
Yep. And the people they tell the truth and they're like, no, that's not true. It's this, it's that, it's, drugs in the water, it's mass hallucinations, it's, and it's, I don't know. I think it's funnier for people to tell them, no, it's not true. And then and then all of a sudden when it happens, they get called, and particularly if it happens in the case early on, where a lot of times with Agent Carver and Agent Mandy Cobb, when they go to a crime scene, Carver tends to have a little bit of a bad attitude. As a former demon-possessed serial killer, he's lost some of his people skills. And
That'll happen.
Yeah.
he'll
Another
say
one of my
it's this,
favorite
and the
characters.
cop's like, and the cops will be like, yeah. And then by the end of it, the cop's like, okay. Or you were telling the truth. Well, yeah. And so then all of a sudden they're grateful to have them. So.
I'm still a little sad that
And,
one of my favorite characters is not planning any future appearances later in books.
Which one?
Ixtab.
Ah.
I want to do something with her. I haven't quite worked it out. It may end up being a Moni story. She's the goddess of suicides and actually protecting of women during childbirth. I'm not quite sure of the exact connection there, except that maybe women, want to have someone else commit suicide for having done that to them at the time of labor. I don't know, maybe.
Well, some of the Mayan ideas in general, because warriors who die in battle, women who die in childbirth, and particularly suicide, the whole idea that Mayans like the Aztecs were prolific in human sacrifice. Unlike the Aztecs, most Mayan sacrifices were actually quite willing. Which more or less is suicide.
Yeah, and then you got the whole thing of you're giving up your life, but another lives. So it's kind of a noble thought in a way.
And with her, with some of the literature I've read, it's supposed to be an honorable suicide, not just just killing yourself, but killing yourself for the betterment of something, as a sacrifice or giving your life to save someone, that kind of thing, which I guess by their standards was considered a suicide. We would consider that maybe a heroic sacrifice, but it definitely is a suicide if, you're
going to die.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. It ties into that birth, creation, destruction kind of thing that a lot of ancient cultures had.
And visually, I think she would be very cool looking because she wears a noose around her neck. In a lot of the legends. So I just,
if you remember
zombie, possibly woman, or just even a creepy death, pale skin type of thing with the noose could just be very cool visually. Not as a writer, I get to describe it.
Yep.
But unfortunately, there have been a couple chances to do comic books based on the characters that fallen through. Luckily, one didn't, where I crossed Hell's Detective over with Blair Webb's Ghostman, and that was a 3-issue miniseries, which Blair's company did, and actually the trade came out from Fantastic Books, and it's a great book. It's just at one point there was a Terror Ball comic that was supposed to come out. I still have the script for issue 1. There were a couple pages that had been done. A company had picked it up, and then when it came to actually handing over the contract, they did not want to continue with it. And at one point I had pitched, and I had a fairly wonderful artist who at the time was willing to do it, and it didn't fly. There's only one Murphy's Law novel, if you would, that I see as a comic book, and it involves Patty's kids and when Hell actually catches up to Rith and Matthew, who are an angel and a succubus, who ran away during a aborted attempt at a at Armageddon. And it was stopped by the people in the bar, and they managed to help them get away, and they've stayed hidden. But at this point, heaven and hell catches up to them, just as they drop their infant son off with Patty's kids to babysit. So it gets a little bit more bizarre from there, and it happens on the one day when there's no one in the bar to help because they're all out. I've established that St. Patrick's Day is a big holiday in the bar.
Yes, you've mentioned in the books, I mean.
Yeah, in the books. And basically, they're all down on Fifth Avenue at the parade because they, they always leave the bar open, but they're like, nah, don't worry about it. No one's going to come in during this. We're all going down the parade. So the kids were there, supposed to be there babysitting, and then this happens. And hell has learned its lesson, so they've blocked all forms of communication, and the novel takes off from there. But I have visualized it, and I wrote the outline for it as like a 100-page graphic novel. So, probably 4 to 5 issues, and it just didn't happen. But it's one of those things that I'll eventually write it as a novel. But just in my mind, it was the only Murphy's Law book that was a graphic novel.
The one thing that occurs to me, if you're not aware of it, have you ever heard of St. Patrick's Purgatory?
I don't think I have.
It's an old pilgrimage site that was supposedly created by St. Patrick himself in England that continued. They used to let people inside of the cave up until, I want to say, the 19th century. And it's still a popular pilgrimage site today. Long story short, the Druids of Ireland wanted a way to prove to people, they wanted Patrick to prove that God existed. So after prayer, Patrick got a solution, and he opened a portal to hell.
Cool. and this portal is still in the cave?
Yes. They used to send, people would go there on pilgrimage. They'd be locked down in this cave for 24 hours, and demons would appear to them and lead them on a journey through hell. And it was, of course, very dangerous because you're going to hell. But eventually people would come out and it would change their lives and wreck their sanity and all the things you would expect.
Oh, my God. See, I'm just picturing a demon as sort of like the White House tour guide. And we're walking, and over there is the circle with the greedy people, and they're all having gold poured down their throat, and to the left, if you look, you'll see.
And then they're vomiting it up and donating, bribing Congress with it.
I mean, just this is the circle. This is completely reserved for politicians. There's nothing on this floor but politicians.
And we're walking,
and we're walking, and keep going.
And as soon as the filibuster stops, the punishment will begin.
Yeah, exactly. I could so see that.
I can see the story.
I see that. It'd be hilarious. The guided tour of hell.
Rick and Morty episode. There
you go.
I was wondering if you were a fan.
Yes. Actually, I came to it a little late, but yes, I am a big fan.
Because it was one of the things you said earlier about, by hell standards, he's a good guy. It kind of made me think of Rick, and by normal people's standards, he's a complete jerk. But by his own standards, he's actually pretty nice.
Well, I wouldn't know if I'd go with nice, but occasionally
by his own standards.
At the very least, he's not a villain.
By his own standards, okay.
And he knows he's never going to be nice to the standards of normal people.
And he stopped caring long before the show started. So yeah.
No, just as a fun fact, St. Patrick has a lot of crazy stories about him. He turned.
I will have to research that portal. That could make a fun Hell's Detective story.
I would think so. But yeah, there's a medieval poem about it and a couple of other legends here and there. Other fun facts: Patrick also turned people into wolves, and
that one I did know.
When Druids
werewolves of St. Patrick
ticked him off, he'd rise the plants up to devour his enemies.
I need to hear more about the werewolves of St. Patrick.
I'll fill you in.
That's a story seed right there.
Yes.
There's
a lot. And actually and supposedly it's like was newsworthy, and I'm trying to remember the details. I have notebooks upon notebooks of notes. But there was a non-European, non-North American country where basically there was an epidemic of werewolves that they've like documented attacked the city and laid siege to it and all this other stuff. And, it's like a documented thing. People, like going with the DMA theory, people dressed up as wolves and people who were just hairy and didn't shave. And, but there's this whole thing where the city was under siege by werewolves. And it was like in 1900s.
Pretty modern,
It was actually
regardless.
newspaper reporting of it.
Nice.
It's like this is one of those moments we need my werewolf expert, former co-host for, because Drew knew werewolf legends very well.
Yeah.
Well, I've always loved the werewolves because by my birth date, I'm supposed to be a werewolf by some legends. So I'm born on Christmas. Apparently, that's sacrilegious of me. So I must become a wolf when the moon is full. Apparently,
Or a vampire, depending on the country.
Yes, sometimes it's a vampire.
Yeah.
Not that the
I
two
just
are all
never
that
had the
different.
affinity for vampires.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that's my area.
But werewolves would be fun. And apparently, if your eyebrows go together, you're a werewolf.
Yep.
First and second
there's all sorts of different ways you can become. You can be born. You can do this. And actually, in Shadow of the Wolf, I deal with bitten. They're buxom belts, which are, depending on the legend you want to go with, are carved from the skin of wolves. And when you put it on, you transform into a wolf.
Yes.
And also, there are people where it's just passed down through the family lineage.
Mhm.
And in Shadow of the Wolf, I have a little bit of fun, and I, again, won't give the spoiler away, but I come up with the way werewolves get their power, because everyone knows how vampires do it. How do werewolves do it? Because it works for my series, it works for the Wolfman, it works for Howling, because in the beginning of all these movies, the werewolf is a howling, raging beast, and by the end of it, there's at least some semblance of human intelligence. How does that happen? Read Shadow of the Wolf to find out. But
It's a great book as well.
It's just one of those things. It made sense to me, and it works for the majority of werewolf movies, except for Teen Wolf. So.
No, I was going to say werewolves have also I'm more fond of vampires like Brian here, but werewolves do definitely fascinate me. Just as my friend and former co-host would put it, what's a werewolf? It depends on which country you ask and what time.
Yeah.
There's even
vampires are fun too. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say there's even a couple of legends of werewolf good guys.
Mm-hmm.
Werewolf what?
Good guys, heroes.
Good. Oh, yes. Well, I did kind of take a legend and twist it to my own ends with Sir Marak from the Knights of the Round Table. And the traditional legends, his wife wanted to mess around with a guy, so she arranged for him to be turned into a wolf. And so he wasn't a werewolf per se, he was just trapped in the body of a wolf until they figured it out and transformed him back. In mine, he's actually a werewolf and more traditional. So it's, I just like the idea of having a werewolf Knight of the Round Table. It's just
So do I.
fun. Because vampires have been done a few times and done well a few times. It just, let's go with a werewolf. It makes more sense. He can come out during the day, have a little bit more fun. So, and it's just fun because I have established a number of the knights who survived, and in some of the legends that I've gone with this one, there are at its height there were 150 Knights of the Round Table, so there were 150 seats at the Round Table, but at various points they were not full because people exiled or died, but that way when a knight died they could have someone else come and fill the spot. Although in the beginning they just got to take up a whole bunch of people.
See, I'm still.
To fill up the seats.
The longer I read your books, the more curious I am. How many Knights of the Round Table are still kicking around in your universe?
Oh,
Well, actually, the story I'm working on will solve that.
Good.
So, at least I've yet to decide on the Keeper of the Holy Grail, and if Percival is still there, he wouldn't be involved if he was. I haven't decided what I want to do with the Holy Grail and the Murphy's universe.
Mm-hmm.
And I have used the Cauldron of Life because I used that for zombies in Camelot,
Mm-hmm.
and the Once and Future Dead, which was one of the stories with Dagonet in it. I just haven't decided and when I haven't decided something, I don't want to bring it up or mention it, because the Holy Grail exists, but how does is this guarded traditionally by Knights of the Grail? Is it something else? Is it, on somebody's shelf? Has it been transformed into something else? So I haven't quite worked that out. So there might be one knight guarding the Grail who wouldn't count in this, but and there's one person I've been hinting at is still around, and you'll find out, because it's a character it's a very minor character, but the character has appeared in a couple of places. So you'll realize that is one of the Knights of the Round Table. And actually, I'll say it's Sir Bedivere.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember this discussion before.
Yep. So he's around, but we'll find out which one he is, and some of the others. And one of the knights who is not traditionally going to be for comic relief in this story is going to be there for a little comic relief because of his condition. So without, again, giving the spoils, it should be a lot of fun.
Of course,
I just
I'm
have to
just
finish it.
remembering something funny going back to one of my favorite characters for a moment. I'm actually still working on trying to do a costume for her. It was funny going around a convention, and I challenged the vendors by asking them, do they have anything to fit a ancient Mayan Gothic Lolita look?
I was going to say, Misha's the one who's
did anyone say yes?
I got one item that would have been interesting, but unfortunately I couldn't afford it at the time, which was a kind of leopard apron.
Ah.
Yeah, that works pretty well.
I'm always amazed by the cosplayers and the detail and the love that goes into these costumes, and in some cases the budget. It's just amazing what people can do, and it's just, I'm amazed by it. And there's been a few times, because if you do that, I would definitely love to see a picture. There's been a few times where people have dressed up as some of my characters, and it's just a huge compliment that someone would actually take the time to do that. And it's just
we'll make sure you get a picture when she does pull it off.
Need to figure out what I did with the rope I bought for the news.
It's around somewhere. Unfortunately, we are starting to run low on time because it's almost 7:30. I do want to ask, while we've got you online, it's probably a good thing to plug as well. What's the status with the Argus movie?
It has been submitted to several film festivals, because the plan is to try to do the film festival circuit first. Hopefully maybe win an award here or there. That wouldn't be so bad. And then hopefully it would be released in some way, shape, or form to be able to be watched. And the long-term hope is that this one will do well enough that Top Man Productions would actually do more short films with the character, and Frank Thon, who is playing Argus, is on board, which is good, because it would be bad if the actor playing the character doesn't want to do it, but he's actually very excited for it. And actually, I have some fun news. Frank and Tom, who's the director, are going to be doing an audiobook of the Soul for Hire's greatest hits. So the guy who plays him in the movie will be doing the audiobook, and I'm very excited about that.
I'll be curious to hear his voice. Because I've seen him.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I've seen the pictures of him. He just, I don't know, I always imagined Argus a little more buttoned down than that, particularly with the hair.
And I said this to the director. It's a small production company. They have limited budget and everything else. The hair kind of got to me at first. I've gotten used to it because Frank did a good job, and he does a very good job as a character. But the hair, just for me, wasn't what I had pictured. But by the time I got to do my cameo in the movie, they'd already done shooting for the first part of the movie, so it was already done by the time I got to see it. So that is my only qualm. And I've mentioned I wasn't quite sure about the wig, but it's grown on me, So, and
I think the rest of his appearance is very good.
Job.
And it's like, I can't comment on his acting, not having seen it yet, but aside from the hair, and the hair's. I have to admit, reading Greatest Hits, the hair started to grow on me too, just looking at the cover. But
Yeah, no, they.
it's like, well, maybe he does have that one little bit of the rebellious out of the button-down idea. But
Yeah, and you take liberties with different movies.
yeah,
you
sir,
know?
of course. Do you have any other? Since we're about to wrap up, do you have any other projects coming out in the near future you want to plug?
20th anniversary Exile Entrance will be out by the end of the year. Next year, Cthulhu Happens, the 5th year Cthulhu collection, and the next hex book is a hex novel by invocation only, and those will all Exile will be out before the end of this year, probably December, officially, unofficially, maybe before, and the other two will be out next year, along with hopefully by the end of the year, the Before Twilight
Nice.
novel. So
I have to say, having read Exile, I'm not. I didn't know what to make of it going in because I'm not always the biggest sci-fi fan. I definitely prefer fantasy. It is a very good book, folks.
thank you. I always planned it as a trilogy, which is odd, but Murphy's Law, which came out a little bit after that, sold better, so that was what I started to focus on. And actually, having gone through it for the 20th anniversary edition, I did minimal changes because my writing style has changed, but I wanted to keep it true to its original format and intent. I actually am more inclined to do a prequel at this point. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully the edition will do good, and I can work on more projects in that universe too.
Like
I said, I always plan 3 of them.
Yeah. Well, I think that really just about wraps it up for us, everybody. Patrick, I want to thank you again for hopping in and joining us. You've been a wonderful guest as always.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me.
Anytime, my friend. Folks, keep in mind next week, same time, 6:30 to 7:30, we'll be having John French, who writes the Bianca Jones series of mysteries. Are really quite fantastic. He's also a crime scene supervisor for the city of Baltimore, Maryland. So he has a nice edge on writing that supernatural mystery of, no, he actually knows police work the way that most of us don't.
And he can
He
answer
actually
for
helps
all of
catch
the,
bad guys.
Yeah.
he can answer for all the problems he's caused Patrick that have been brought up.
Let's talk
That'd be
about
great,
what
thanks.
you've been blaming him for.
Yes. Get his side on it.
But okay.
Well, he'll probably complain because for the anthology, I'm one of the editors, and I'm the only one who hasn't turned the story in. So I'm sure he'll
Of
complain
course
about
you
that. So, but you know, I'll have it in well before we
You have it in time. Folks, you can also remember find us on Facebook, Paranormal Encyclopedia. You can also find us on YouTube, Paranormal Encyclopedia. There's 70 some other videos up there, as well as we upload each interview about a week after it hits the air. If you want to listen to something again, or if you miss it, check us out. Feel free to get in touch if you have any questions. Keep in mind, I'm still an active investigator, so if anybody out there is having problems with the paranormal, feel free to drop me a line. But that's it for this week. I want to thank, again, Patrick and my co-host Brian and my sidekick Amisha. And good night, everybody.
You are clear.
Clear.
Good job. Good job.
I know.
Zap.